Joining me right now to discuss this and what it means, CNN legal analyst, defense attorney, and former federal prosecutor Shan Wu. He briefly represented the star witness, as Jessica was talking about, Rick Gates. Also with us, CNN legal analyst, former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti. Renato, you just heard Jessica coming out of the courtroom, what they're saying, at least what prosecutors are laying out in this first hour of their closing arguments. What do you think of the approach?
It's really textbook. When you have a lot of counts, what the jury is looking for as an answer is there the evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt each of what's called the elements of those crimes, each of the specific components of the crimes that they need to find. So what the prosecution is doing is methodically walking through that evidence, showing the jury that for each of those 18 counts, they've presented evidence of his guilt, and they're keeping the focus on Manafort. So when you're a prosecutor, what you're trying to do is be laser focused on the defendant and what the defendant did and said, and usually that's talking about how the defendant lied, because that is the key component of fraud, is that you're lying to get money. So what the defense is going to do is they're going to try to distract. They're going to talk about Rick Gates. They're going to talk about all of these other people. What the prosecution's job is to do is to bring it all back to Manafort, what he did, what he said.
Shan, as Renato saying, kind of go methodically through it. Can you methodically go into too much detail when it comes to a closing argument?
That's certainly possible, in that you could lose the jury, and the prosecution will have thought carefully about, what are the nuggets that they really want to put forth. And Renato's right, they do have to do it methodically, and what they're hoping is that it's more of a review and a highlighting, and if they feel that they're losing the jurors' attention, there's no worse feeling than being a prosecutor doing a long closing and you feel like their eyes are glazing over it, and you don't know if that's because they're with you or because they're just not following you anymore.
That sounds terrifying. It's like losing an audience, but with real-life ramifications. Forget if I'm losing my audience. If you're losing the jury in your audience, that's even worse. Renato, you had said that you're not surprised that the defense didn't call a single witness, didn't offer any evidence. So then what does the defense then do in closing?
You argue the case. So, look, if the defense had these amazing witnesses, they would have called them. If they had somebody who said, Manafort was really set up, I saw Rick Gates altering the accounts or the emails or something else, they would have put those witnesses forward. But usually the defense doesn't have anything quite that good to work with. Your choice is either calling no witnesses or calling one or two not very compelling witnesses or not very central witnesses. So what you do on the defense side is you say, look, the prosecution has the burden of proof. They have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's such a high burden. And look at all of these crazy things that happened here. Maybe, Rick Gates was the real bad guy. He's a liar. He was hiding things from Manafort. Maybe he hid more things. You try to distract the jury from what really matters. You try to throw as many things up against the wall and see what sticks. And that's why the prosecution has to be laser focused. And I agree with what you and Shan were saying. You also have to try to keep it short and concise. I was concerned when prosecutors were talking about needing 2 hours. I tried to keep my initial closing arguments in even complicated, long, white-collar cases to an hour or less because, frankly, the jury gets tired and bored. They don't like hearing lawyers talk. So you try to keep it as short as possible and get to the point, because the defense is going to try to distract the jury from the important evidence.
And Shan, the fact that they didn't present really any evidence, they didn't call any witnesses, and what they'll be going through in their closing, does that give you an inkling into the strength or weakness of the prosecution's case here?
I think it gives us a strong clue as to what the defense thinks of the strength. I mean, I think that they feel they scored some good points on cross, and they have enough to work with. And as Renato said, I mean, there's a limited amount you can usually present on the defense side unless you're going to put your client on, and they weren't going to do that. They think they've got enough to go on, and look for them also, not necessarily in this instance to do the sort of shotgun approach. You can get some senses of what they're going to zero in on. I mean, a strong point for them is, we told you that Gates stole money, and everyone agrees he did. That helps their credibility. And two, they're also going to point to that same fact showing that he was able to hide something from Manafort. And I think they'll look to build on that, as well as a couple of other small points they've made about the documents and other witnesses. So I don't think they'll be trying to throw everything, including the kitchen sink here. I think they'll really try and focus it on those points.
And Renato, then what do you think of what, adding into the mix, we're not talking about, we have the Russia investigation, this is a tax and bank fraud case, of course. But what do you then make of what Rudy Giuliani is proposing right now? That the Mueller investigation, that Mueller isn't making any moves on his investigation until he sees how the Manafort trial shakes out.
I think Giuliani has no idea what he's talking about, to be very honest with you. I think he's just talking out of his butt. And to use a euphemism, there's no way that Robert Mueller and his staff are sitting around doing nothing, watching the trial, waiting for that to end. You know, remember, it's the president's team that has been dragging this out. I've never seen an investigation this long about a single interview. They're trying to run out the clock probably because the midterms are coming up. Now they're saying, well, you know, he's speculating about what Mueller's team is doing. I don't think anything about the interview of the president rests on the outcome of this trial. I just think that's pure speculation by Giuliani.
Renato, great to see you. Shan, great to see you. And love your euphemisms these days. All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate